Hey guys, so this is the throne of bone that I have made using EVA foam and real bone for the actual throne itself. This build was an absolute blast and really came as an unexpected surprise. The guys over on Instagram, Encounter Terrain, you should definitely check them out. Join their Discord as well. They're a really friendly bunch. But they run a monthly competition which is a themed competition with one or two caveats. The most important one being it has to be on a 10 centimetre by 10 centimetre base touching the ground. It can be a little wider, it can be 20 centimetres wide above ground, but it has to be on this 10 centimetre by 10 centimetre square. The theme for this was left and repurposed. So my idea are these ancient bones of some great beast that were lashed together to create a throne. I came to realise that I wanted it to sit on a plinth. So today's video is going to be about this plinth and everything that went into the design of it and the making of it. But in the meantime, let's build this. There were two really big challenges for this competition. The first is 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres is not a very big area, and the second one is I'd got a fairly unadaptable base material for what it is I wanted to build. So I cut out the square that I needed as my base and then started playing around with the actual bones that are going to create the throne itself. Now that is, to be fair, in the next video. It's not part of this one. This is just going to be the base piece. So after I'd looked at the bones and saw what kind of size this throne was actually going to be, I realised that the initial 10 centimetre by 10 centimetre square was not going to be big enough. However, there is a caveat in the competition, thankfully, which allows you to extend upwards and outwards by 5 centimetres on all sides. So I could actually end up with a 20 by 20 centimetre square on which the throne could sit. As long as the base that touched the ground was only 10 centimetres on a side, then it fit the competition requirements. It really is quite a constraint and presented itself with a lot of challenges. As is the way with most of my builds, I like to just play around with shapes and basic ideas, really just feeling it as I go rather than overly designing it in the first instance and then creating it. So right now all I'm doing is just looking for a shape, a way of elevating that 20 by 20 centimetre square off the ground, and how a miniature can move around that but keep that shape more interesting than just a square. So obviously if the throne is going to be elevated up above the base, then a character engaging with it needs to be able to get up onto that surface. So one of the first considerations was stairways that would lead up to that point. Designing the stonework on this throne plinth was really important to me this time. In my dungeon build for the Dungeon of the Dead 3 from Descent into Avernus, I used the burning tool, and that was because it was such a large volume of pieces that I was creating. However, the final effect was a slightly less than satisfying aesthetic.
So this time round I wanted to really build on that aesthetic and carve the stones individually, make sure that they were placed properly, things like steps as I'm doing here as well, so that each brick had its own character. One of the great things about EVA foam as well is that you can dry run it by just pinning it all together before you've committed to gluing, so you can just check out what the final thing's going to likely look like with all of the different parts just pinned together. Right now, what I wanted to raise the elevation of the plinth up even higher than what the throne itself would stand. So this backing stone of real great height would be very, very dominant and give the whole thing an even greater grandeur. And I'm actually piecing this together from little bits of scraps that I'd already cut out from the earlier parts of the project. And as the design itself developed, I really quite liked the fact that these parts were all individual pieces, and so I go on to actually make them look like the stone has been cracked into several parts and sort of chained back together with old heavy chains that you'll see later in the build. Yeah, you've probably guessed it already. With the elevated platform and the weight of the throne itself, there's a little bit of a balancing issue that I needed to resolve. So my intention is to add these flaming pits at the front of the plinth that I can weight in some way to counterbalance the weight of the throne. Hopefully this will work out, and in fact it did work out quite well, in part. I'll return to that point a little later. EVA foam wasn't really going to suit for this part of the build, so I turned to packaging card. You get on your cereal boxes, and so what I needed to create here was just a box. It was a pretty simple thing to mark up and cut out. Got that done, but what I found is I wanted something that had a bit more of an interesting shape than just a block. So I decided I would have a go at curving inward the bottom section of the box. So I found the vertical center point, drew a line there, and then I found the center point of each panel and drew a line down there on the lower half of this box. Then I just basically freehanded a curve that I just hoped would come together when I bent the card to suit once it was cut out. I figured, considering I'd just freehanded that, it had worked out pretty damn well. A couple of little gaps there, but the super glue was going to fix that, and certainly paint was a microscopic gap. I wasn't worried about it. So yeah, cut a piece of square for the base so that I could close the base off, and I was happy with that, the end result. Okay, back onto the main structure and those stairs. Now, I've always advocated that a miniature should be able to stand on each step, so it's playability over realism. But I will be honest, I watched a tutorial by Zorpazorp and he cut some stairs, and I thought, you know what, I am gonna have a go at making stairs that are more in scale with the miniature than the fact that the miniature's base can stand on them. So it's a simple process of cut down vertically a part way of the distance, and then just slicing horizontally to take out that little nub of foam. I was really impressed with this, and I have to say I think I might just be converted to steps in scale rather than steps that miniatures can stand on. We'll see. Then it's just a simple process of gluing it into place so that the structure gains a little bit more rigidity and strength from this as well, as foam still flexes quite a lot of these earlier stages until it's had the heat seal and surface seals applied. With the stairs fit, it's time to attach the fire pits to the front so that I can test out my solution to the balancing issue. So what I'm going to do is, into those boxes, for want of a better word, is put some weights, and these are just large washers that will hopefully counterbalance the weight of the throne itself. Believe me, I was super happy that that did actually work. Now that my balancing issue was resolved, I could get on with detailing out the rest of the stonework. And as I'd said earlier, I wanted to use individual slabs of stone to give better character to this piece. And so just taking a knife and slicing a suitably shaped piece of foam, I was able to create individual flagstones to place wherever they were needed. And I really felt that this gave a lot of dynamic to that stone surface, and again I think this is going to inform my builds going forward. Definitely worth the extra time doing. So after going crazy with the soldering iron to add the nice rugged stony texture to this build, it is time to get on with the sealing. PVA glue is my go-to seal for EVA foam. It gives it a good solid surface, and it's also great for bonding the browning plaster that I use to add to that texture. There's always a sense of closure and a need to finish when we get to the painting stage. Generally by now I've got my next build already underway and I'm excited to get on with it. On this type of build though, the paint work is usually a fairly quick process. So I start with a black masonry paint. It just adds that little layer of micro detail. I then lightened that just a little with a cadmium yellow acrylic paint, and that gave me a very deep dark green base over which to then apply a dry brushed lighter grey. And the reason for the green was inspired by the green foam that I'd actually used, and I felt that I really wanted to have green stone for this build. However, if it was all green, I think it would have lost a little of the aesthetic. So I separated it out with a grey stone with a kind of very dark green undertone, and then this more jade-like stone for the actual throne dais and the standing stone at the back of the plinth. The greystone plinth was dry brushed further still with an even lighter grey mixed just from black and white, and then that was given a wash of a dirty brown green colour just to harmonise a little. I wanted a separation between the two areas of colour, but I felt that the greystone looked a little too stark. And then to make that jade section of the throne really be able to pop, I gave the green stone a highlight of cad yellow acrylic that had been lightened just a touch with white. It's time to get back to those fire pits at the front of the plinth. And I'd been watching the Hobbit movies and Lord of the Rings movies, and I'd got inspired by those curving horn-like shapes found in the architecture of Dol Guldur and Mordor and the bad places. So I set to cutting out a shape that would work from cereal box card, and this is basically just a horned shape cut out from a folded piece of card, so that when you open it out you've got sort of two halves, and then when that's glued back together it's going to form the curve of a spiky horn, and those are then attached to the box structure of the fire pits themselves. I did paint these up just to match the rest of the stonework, and then I made the decision to make the whole of the fire pit structure have a more metallic sheen to it, so I gave them a dirty bronzed metallic coat, which was then dry brushed with black washes to dirty it back up. So the box-like interior was filled with hot glue, and those weights, those washers, were just chucked inside so that they set. Now I did have to leave something of a gap for the battery for the upcoming fire effects to sit in. So LED lighting is not something I'm that well versed in, so right now I still am in the use a tea light solution to most of my LED needs. It's definitely an area that I want to expand my knowledge into so that I can do more advanced LED work in my builds. But for right now, this is a perfect solution. Here I'm applying a hot melt glue to the bulb side of the LED on this piece of card that's been painted an orangey brown colour. Now as the hot melt glue cools, you can pull it around with a barbecue skewer and form these flame-like structures which will look great once they're painted up. I want to add the appearance of coals at the base of the fire pit, so I'm using my go-to material, which is vermiculite, which is a really great little gardening product, very cheap. So I'm just super gluing that to the base here. The paint job for these fire pits is pretty straightforward. We start off with a fairly thin down paint, yellow at the top, working down into oranges and reds at the base. And then the coals, that vermiculite, are dry brushed with a good dark colour, generally a black or a very, very dark brown. I had one last finishing detail to do, but it was a pretty straightforward one, and that was to take a piece of jewellery chain, sand it down and give it a dirtying up with a blackish brown stain. Then that was fed through some holes that had been punched through the foam of the rear standing stone of the plinth. A couple of spots of glue just to hold it in place, and there we go.